I have seen something like that.
I was wondering if there is some relativity to statements such not in your terms concepts, but something like concepts like that. What do we make of metaphorical speech? Of metaphorical speech. So we use concepts metaphorically. We are not using them according to the simple spelling out of the norms that may be implied in them. And there seem to be at least three alternatives. So we could either say that the rules are a bit more complicated and they include the way we could metaphorically use a concept. We could say when we use a concept metaphorically, these rules are suspended temporarily for these cases, so there are exceptions to those rules. Or we could say that metaphorical use is a intended breaking of the rules. So I was wondering which of these versions would be maybe the most sympathetic.
Well, it depends on what theory of metaphor you have. I personally have none, but I sympathize with vaguely Gricean views about metaphor. Anyway, the issue of metaphor in this context is just an example of linguistic transgression, which is nevertheless understood, or we can even say significant. Another example are malapropisms, for example. Another kind of linguistic transgression, which is on the face of it a linguistic transgression that has some communicative efficacy. Now, I believe that, and there are other cases, I believe all those cases must be dealt one by one separately, and that, of course, includes the case of metaphor. What you want to explain is, given that there seem to be semantic norms attached to words and linguistic expressions in general, how can, and given the role that is usually attributed to such semantic norms, how can it be that even when such norms are transgressed, people sort of get along with one another fairly well? I wrote something like lots of people try to answer that question. One could try to do it. The people that did most to try to answer that question are the Davidsonians, in my opinion, particularly Achille Bilgrami has a lot of work on that. I disagree with them, but that would be enough story. Sorry.
But it's just a clarification question. It's not clear to me how a group fact might have normative implications. Consider for which example, if S killed someone, then S ought to be punished. Well, I would say that we obtain the consequent only if we associate to the antecedent a norm, as if someone killed another person, well, this person ought to be punished. So it's not the fact that have normative implication. It has this normative implication, I would say, only if there is a norm that holds.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. Nevertheless, it seems to me that Horwitz's point stands, because what he wants to say, after all, is just that a certain conditional is true, and it's a conditional that has a factual antecedent and a normative consequence. Now, why that conditional is true is a different issue. It may very well be true because there's a certain general norm, that prescribes that in certain circumstances, so and so. But I agree that may be seen as a different issue. Horwitz doesn't claim that that's a valid inference, all right? That is, it doesn't claim that, say, the consequent logically follows from the antecedent. He just claims that that's a true conditional. And therefore, there are true conditionals that have a descriptive antecedent and a prescriptive consequent.
I have a small point on your second critique of the anti-normativity argument. So
let's go back to that.
okay.
So everybody can see.
So actually, I agree with you, and I would like to say something more. Sorry, the slide before. So if can you speak up?
No.
Yes, I'm sorry, but my voice today is not ideal. So the point I wish to
Okay.
talk about was in cases in which the obligation to apply a word depends on the truth norm, okay? They say, I read from what I copied down before. In cases in which the obligation to apply cat to cats are exactly the cases in which the truth norm is suspended, then the obligation at that time depends on the truth norm, and they conclude so the semantic norm depends on the truth norm, so there is no semantic norm, properly speaking. And okay, I see that to me this point is particularly weak, because it's normal in a system of norms to have hierarchy of norms, and if there's a norm at a lower point, this doesn't mean that it is devoid of normative import. I mean, you need to subscribe, or if they want to pursue this conclusion, they need to subscribe to a sort of reductive idea of norms, according to which only the top hierarchy, the top norm is yeah.
Yeah, it is easy to misunderstand what they say in precisely that way, and that's a misreading that I was also responsible for at some point. That is, one gets the impression that these people are saying that the fact that a norm can be overridden by another norm shows that the first norm was not there to begin with, or was not a norm, or is in some sense not really a norm. Now, that would be just a mistake, of course. We would all disagree with that, as you pointed out. But they are not doing that. They are not saying that. What they are saying is that the fact that the apply norm depends on the truth norm of holding, and only on the truth norm holding, shows that the normative input in the premise is entirely carried by the truth norm. That is, the apply norm holds when and only when the truth norm holds. Now, the reason why I claim that the argument is fallacious, actually it is circular, is that they do as if it were sort of to be taken for granted that meaning cat has no normative input. That's just a fact. That's just a fact. Therefore, it cannot play any normative role. It cannot carry any normative weight, which is what they should prove, of course.
Last question.
Yeah, I have final doubt about, again, this point, and it's precisely about the obligation to tell the truth. Okay, they seem to use it as an obligation that has no semantic state. So it is, in their interpretation, it's just an ethical. What kind of obligation is that if it's completely detached from semantics? Because if it is the obligation, if it is a semantic obligation, then I can't see the distinction with just the obligation to apply the word cat to a cat. So, and instead, in the example of when you don't have to apply the word cat to a cat, because doing that will generate bad ethical consequences, it seemed to me that the obligation to tell the truth was that kind of an ethical norm itself, or it's not exactly clear what the obligation to tell the truth would boil down to in that particular case, according to the anti-normativist in that case.
Yeah. Well, suppose I ask you, when was America discovered in modern times? And I point out that if you intend to tell the truth, or if the normal truth holds for you, then you ought to answer 1492. Now, what's the nature of you ought to answer 1492? What kind of ought is that? Well, in this case, it seems clear that the kind of ought that is relevant there depends on how you interpret the normal truth. What's your assessment of what kind of norm the normal truth is? Is it an ethical norm? Is it some sort of epistemic norm? Both claims have been made, of course. Now, of course, these people are prepared to say that, the answer is sort of elliptic. If you intend to tell the truth, you ought to say it's 1492. You should probably say, if 1492 refers to 1492 and the normal truth holds, then you should answer 1492. Because, of course, if 1492 designated a totally different number, then that is not what you ought to say. Of course, you ought to say 23. If that is the way 1492 is called in your language, you should say 23. So both premises are required, strictly. Now, of course, here comes my point. If both premises are required, why is the normative weight only carried by the truth norm?
And with this rhetorical question, we think we may stop and thank the speaker and the questions. And by the way, there is a mismatch in the program. In the morning, you have to read 11 as 11:15.